Our reading from the Hebrew Scriptures this morning is taken from the first book of Samuel, 1 Samuel chapter 3 and verses 1 through 11. Listen to the Spirit's voice in this reading from Samuel. Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord under Eli, the high priest. The word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were not widespread. At that time, Eli, whose eyesight had begun to grow dim so that he could not see, was lying down in his room. The lamp of God had not yet gone out. And Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called, Samuel, Samuel. And he said, Here I am. And he ran to Eli and said, Here I am, for you called me. But he said, I did not call. Go lie down again. So he went and lay down. The Lord called again, Samuel. Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, Here I am, for you called me. But he said, I did not call, my son. Go lie down again. Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. The Lord called Samuel again a third time, and he got up and went to Eli and said, Here I am, for you called me. Then Eli perceived that it was the Lord that was calling the boy. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, Go, lie down, and if he calls you, you shall say, Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Now the Lord came and stood there, calling as before, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel said, Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. Then the Lord said to Samuel, See, I am about to do something in Israel that will make both ears of anyone who hears it tingle. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You've probably heard that story from 1 Samuel a few times. I like the story. I think it is a story for our times. I think it's a story written for an age much like the one on which we live. The word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were not widespread. This is a tale for our age. It's got a lot of literary devices, too. Did you notice all the symbolism in this story? Some foreshadowing. And it sets itself up as a story that takes place in an age where miracles are forgotten. You know, all the miracles of the Pentateuch, the first few books of the Bible, the manna in the desert, the miraculous crossing of the Red Sea, all of that stuff, by the time this story takes place, all of that is a bunch of bedtime tales. A bunch of half-forgotten myths. You don't find many miracles in 1 and 2 Samuel, though I will say they're very entertaining. 1 and 2 Samuel. By the time this book rolls around, nobody expects God to whisper into the night, not even in the temple. 1 and 2 Samuel are full of stories of palace intrigue and ancient politics and complex characters with mixed motives and divided hearts. And we probably know a little something about people like that. Why would it surprise anyone that God would speak in the holy place? But it does, and frankly, it would. It would, if we were to hear God's voice, even in this room. Young Samuel is preparing for the priesthood, and the text says, strangely, that he did not yet know the Lord. And did you catch the fact that the lamp is burning dim in the night? And old Eli, the high priest, is sleepy, and he's just trying to get some rest. He's so tired. The imagery of shadow and nightfall and near blindness, it makes a very clear case for the desolation of religion in those times, and perhaps in many times down through history. Find me a Bible story with as much literary detail as this one. You know, when you're writing with a quill, and an ink pot, you don't get to put in a whole lot of details. You have to skip them. Ironically, though, it is doomed old Eli, the sleepy priest, who provides the antidote to the problem that his own blindness and sleepiness has helped to cause. He instructs young Samuel to be still and to say this prayer: "Speak, Lord, I'm listening. Speak, I'm listening." Listen, the story tells you. Listen, and your very ears will tingle. What they lacked in their times is exactly the thing that we lack in ours. We don't listen. We don't listen to each other. We don't listen to ourselves. And we certainly don't listen to God. We don't listen. Maybe if we listened to each other and to ourselves and to the divinity all around us and within us, maybe our ears would tingle sometimes too for the listening. Years ago, at another church in another town, I belonged to a clergy group that met once a month. Most of us pastored little traditional Main Street small town churches like you see in any small town in America, with grand ornate buildings and fading old congregations. The kind of church you see whenever you drive through a small town. Lutheran, Methodist, Catholic, Presbyterian. There were a few stripes of evangelical churches as well in our clergy group. And in addition to serving our own congregations, we took turns each week acting as the on-call chaplain to the local nursing home and the little hospital that they had in that town at that time. Most fun of all, we took turns preaching on the local country music station every Sunday. They would pre-record us and broadcast our sermon amidst country music songs. Small town life can be really fun, and it can be beautiful and meaningful. And it was a good gig for a young pastor, but I digress. The clergy group that I belonged to, we had every kind of pastor in that group. We had a grand old Swedish Lutheran, dignified in his 70s, as tall as a door, with grim blue eyes and these big gray mutton chop sideburns. He never smiled. On the other end of the spectrum, we had this laid-back, easy-going, 30-something Pentecostal guy with skinny jeans and a goatee, which was probably more fashionable back then than it is now. And he said things like, "Peace out" and "chillax." He might call you my peeps. You might have expected us to feel competitively toward each other, but we did not. We were friends and confidants to each other. We were all trying to point people toward something higher and bigger than themselves. And some of us used the Eucharist to get there, and others used the gifts of the Spirit. In my case, I used the foolishness of preaching. But we were allies in trying to get people to see the bigger picture of life and meaning in their own lives. And so we came together once a month to share the joys and the stresses of ministry. One day, the young pastor of Chillax fame, the young pastor told us that he had been to the hospital bed of one of his parishioners, a member of his flock, who was actually the leader of his praise band, a guy with a deep, booming bass voice. And we all knew the guy in question, the parishioner in question, who was in the hospital. He was having emergency surgery from which he did not return. He did not survive it. But this man, before going under the knife, had wanted to speak to his pastor urgently. And so his pastor came. But in the prepping room, there was so much noise, and the man's voice, as he began to fade, was so quiet that the pastor really couldn't hear what he was saying. He could see that the man was very passionately telling him something, but he couldn't hear it. And he couldn't say, can you just talk louder? And so he had to just act like he heard what the guy was saying and really try to listen. What was it? Was it a deathbed confession? Was it a doubt, a fear? Was it a request that he was making? He couldn't hear, and so the pastor just nodded and listened as best he could and said a prayer. Then they wheeled the guy off, and nobody saw him alive ever again. And with sadness, this young pastor said, I never got to hear his last words. He called me there to hear these words, and I never got to hear them. And after a long, awkward silence, the old Swedish Lutheran pastor said, but you listened. You really listened. And that was all he needed. And that was all you could do. Listening. Has anyone ever really listened to you? Have you ever really listened to someone else? Did you catch 1 Samuel, the way it evokes a mood in this reading? In this story about the tired old priest Eli with his eager young apprentice. It's night, the priest just wants to rest. He's tired, he's weary. He's also half blind. There's still a single lamp burning above the altar in the temple. But apart from that, it's dark, it's silent, it's still. It is a scene of spiritual emptiness, darkness, desolation. The book goes on to say, if you read 1 and 2 Samuel, which I hope you will, it's most entertaining. The book goes on to say that Eli's two ne'er-do-well rogue sons are set to inherit the high priesthood, because you inherited those positions back then. They are going to become the co-high priests after their father dies or retires. And though Eli had done a decent enough job as high priest, his sons would not do a good job. They were thieves, they were womanizers. They saw the priesthood as an opportunity to have prestige and power and money. And Eli knows that his boys are louts. He knows they can't do the job. And so he just can't retire. He just keeps on keeping on. Though he should have retired a long time ago. He should be at home watching Wheel of Fortune. Young Samuel, whose name means God hears. Young Samuel is the only one who seems to be listening when a new sound is heard in the temple at night. A note, a whisper, a song, his own name. The divine voice is calling. At first, Samuel thinks it's old Eli the priest calling for him. But by the third time he gets up and runs to Eli, Eli begins to understand. Maybe somebody else is calling this kid. Maybe it's actually God who's calling this kid. And so he instructs the child wisely. Go back to bed, and if you hear the call again, say this. Speak. I'm listening. Speak, Lord. I'm listening. And Samuel obeys, and then God speaks to Samuel and says, I'm about to do a new thing, and everybody who listens to what I'm about to do, their ears will tingle. I love that. When was the last time you heard something that made your ears tingle? Their ears will tingle. But then the thing that God goes on to say that God is going to do that's new, it doesn't make my ears tingle. Incidentally, God tells Samuel that Eli's sons are about to come to a bad end, and that Eli's line will disappear and be replaced. The point is that Samuel listened. Maybe if we listened to each other, to ourselves, to God, to the divinity all around us and within us, maybe if we listened, sometimes our ears would tingle as well. You know, seeing and hearing are huge themes throughout the entire Bible. The Hebrew Scriptures frequently speak of these idols who have eyes but do not see and ears but do not hear. And then Jesus, when he just wants to confuse people, I think, after his most mystifying sayings and parables will say, let anyone who has ears hear. That's about the same as when your phone tells you to find the route. It's not very helpful. Let those who have ears to hear, hear. But hearing is hard. And why is hearing hard? Because we already know what we think we're going to hear, and so we don't listen all that closely. We're kind of like dogs. You know, dogs speak English very well as long as you're saying something that they're interested in. As long as you're talking to them about going on a walk or getting something to eat, they understand quite well what you're saying. We're kind of like that. We understand the things that interest us quite well. We make assumptions about the rest. We learned a long time ago which things in this life to listen for, the things that interest us, the things that speak to our egos. And our old, tired Eli brains mostly hear those things and little else. We listen for buzzwords, we listen for sound bites, we listen for dog whistles. We listen for the things that speak to our egos, for good or for ill. And much of the rest of it, we'll just assume we know what you're talking about. Or as a comedian once said, my wife probably says that I don't listen to her. Listening is one of those things that we already think we're doing until we catch somebody not quite listening to us and we're like, oh, I'm not listening to him either, or her. I'm not listening to them. Listening is one of those things that we just assume other people do when we speak until we get to a place in life where we realize that many people have already made up their minds about what they think we're going to say, and they just assume that that's what we're saying no matter what we are saying. There are places in your life where no one will hear you, for sure, because they'll just see the way you look or hear the way you talk, and they'll assume the rest about who you are and what you're about. Try being a preacher on an airplane. I mean, there are places where I go where if I speak, what will people hear? They'll hear a snooty-sounding, college-educated suburbanite. And to them, I will represent part of their problem in life, and maybe I am part of their problem in life. I don't know. And they won't be able to hear what I say. And how much more so for people who truly are disadvantaged in this country, who don't have the privilege that I have. I don't mean to talk the way I do, it's just the way I talk. And if I talked any other way, it would be condescending. But people won't always hear you for who you are. They'll hear you for who they think you are, who they assume you are. And God forgive me, I probably do the same to other people on a regular basis. The brain is lazy. It skips the hard work of really listening to other people. And it just fills in the gaps of all the stuff it skipped with information that it already believes it possesses. Who are the individuals in your life who really listen to you or who listened to you? You could probably name them. I think truly you could name the people in your life who really deeply heard you and paid attention to you when you spoke. You probably have fewer than you have fingers on one hand. I'm talking about people who did not listen to you with an agenda, people who did not listen for what they wanted or expected you to say. I mean people who listened when you were speaking about things that didn't affect them in the slightest, but they listened because they affected you. They put themselves and their egos and interests aside long enough to hear you. Because if that happens to you, you remember it. And you remember that person. Our society is so lonely that we pay people to listen to hear us talk. And I'm glad they're there. It's a good thing that they're there. But is there any greater gift that we can give each other than to deeply hear? Put down our busyness, put aside what we're doing, and really listen when a person speaks to us. You could probably name the people who have done you that honor, and you do not forget them. This came up in confirmation class last week, and two people came to mind in my own life. My maternal grandmother came to mind. Make no mistake, that woman had agendas for all of her grandchildren. But she loved children, and she understood children, and she could put aside her agendas long enough to give us her undivided attention. So few adults will give that to a child. When you're a kid, nobody really listens to you. The other person who really listened to me deeply was the pastor of the small church I attended in Oklahoma City, the pastor I've been trying to imitate these past 20 years. He was a good listener. Grandma and Pastor Kennedy, they've been dead for years, but their attentiveness still gives me guidance and comfort. Old Eli the priest, for all his weariness and his failure, he still has the wisdom to know what Samuel needs. He needs to listen. Samuel needs to listen. He's so young and he's so fresh and he's so eager to be of service. He's, as they say, a quivering mass of availability. With his stock phrase, "Here I am, you called me." Eli says, "Samuel, my child, go back to bed and just listen. Say this prayer. Speak, Lord. I'm listening." And that's the key, isn't it? What if we stopped our speaking and just listened? Listen to your body. Our bodies are always trying to tell us something, and we don't pay very good attention to those. Listen to your moods. Listen to your feelings. Listen to your urges, your desires. Not that you have to obey all of them, but we have to know where they're coming from. Listen to your conscience. Listen to your memories. Listen to your stray thoughts and your dreams. These things are there for a reason. We need to listen to ourselves, and we need to listen to each other. Honestly, I think it is easier to listen to someone we don't care much about or to a stranger than it is to listen to someone we love. Because when you love someone, you've got an agenda for that person. You know what is right for that person, and you need them to know what is right for them. Love creates that anxiety, doesn't it? We know what's right for the people we love, and they need to know it too. And it's hard for us to be objective and to really listen when they speak to us. Let's listen to the people we love without self-interest. Harder still, we need to listen to those people that we struggle to love. On the way to church today, we got behind a pickup truck pulling out of some neighborhood of Bridgeville that had a huge Israeli flag and a huge American flag and a bunch of bumper stickers, probably 40 or 60 bumper stickers, saying every manner of thing to offend me. Things about guns and things about war and things about politics and things about abortion and things about prayer. And I thought as I was coming here, knowing I had to preach this sermon, I'm supposed to listen to this guy. Probably if you've put 60 bumper stickers on your truck, it's because you don't feel heard. Somewhere in the life of the world, you feel like you're being ignored. You feel like somebody's acting like you don't matter. And frankly, we have acted like a lot of people don't matter. And that's why they're desperate. It's hard to hear this person because he's being so loud and so obnoxious. But where does that come from? What's beneath that? What's beneath all those bumper stickers? All those easy truths? What's beneath all of that? What if we could hear each other? One person sees the Confederate flag and says, "Dull-witted bigots." I'm talking not about the Confederate flag of history. I'm talking about the one that flies in rural Pennsylvania. And they think, those people are full of hatred. Another sees a rainbow bumper sticker on a Subaru, and they say, there's a weak elitist who couldn't start a push mower. We don't need to hear them because we already know what they think. We know everything about that person. All we have to see is their bumper stickers. If we listened to each other, instead of relying on cartoons that we have of each other, we might get to the heart of our differences and maybe reach common ground and maybe mutual respect, maybe love. Maybe love. We need to listen to ourselves, we need to listen to each other, and we need to listen to God. We need to be quiet sometimes and listen to God. In silence and in song, in words and in images, in nature and in human hustle, we need to listen. Maybe turn off the radio. In beauty and in pain, in togetherness and in solitude, let's put aside our agendas sometimes and just listen. We tend to see in life those things that we've always seen, and we hear those things that we've always heard or expect to hear. Today, let's take old Eli's advice. Let us say that prayer. Speak, Lord. I'm listening. Speak, I am listening, and then let us listen. If we listen to each other, and if we listen to ourselves, and if we listen to God, maybe sometimes our ears would tingle too. Amen.